Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have a few more people that should be on the way, but I figured we can go ahead and get started. To the Shady Rose, I'm the events manager here at Lost City Books. And Lost City Books, this wonderful magical place around you. We are a used, new, and rare bookstore, which means if you have the chance to peruse our shelves, you'll find all of our carefully selected books very tightly packed because we are cramming as much love and care into the selections that we bring into the store as possible, which is why On Freedom Road is joining the family of books on the shelves of Lost City Books. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. Please silence your cell phones. In a room like this, those things can be really loud, and we want to offer the utmost respect to our speaker this evening. Nextly, if you ordered your book online through our website and have not yet received it, just come and check in with me first, and I'll make sure that you get that. Nextly, if you have any comments or questions, please hold them until the end of our discussion. We'll have some time built in for that. And as you can see, based on all of this cyborg technology here, we are live streaming both on YouTube and Instagram. And while none of you are visible, if you do choose to ask a question or offer a comment, that will be a part of the live stream. Now I'd like to introduce our wonderful author for this evening. David Goodrich is the former head of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Climate Observations and Monitoring Program, and served as the director of the UN Global Climate Observing System in Geneva, Switzerland. He is the author of A Hole in the Wind, which was a One City, One Book pick for San Francisco, and A Voyage Across an Ancient Ocean, which is also available from Pegasus Books. He lives in Rockville, Maryland. Please welcome David Goodrich. Thank you. Oh, one moment, sorry. David, thank you so much. David, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I'm really glad that you're here because I am really intrigued by the concept behind this book. So I don't want biking 3,000 miles anywhere. It's a feat to be celebrated. But also taking such historic and meaningful journey with that time. Can you tell me a little bit about what was the impetus to begin that journey and to document it and to write about it?
There were two events really that got me on this. When I rode across to Oregon on the first long bike ride that I did, I recall going across the plains. I used to do ships, and one of the things you come town on the or to a coffee shop, just get out of the wind. And the first thing that you see kind of rising up of the curvy earth would be the water tank from the town. And it's just like when I was at sea for NOAA, when you make landfall, very often the first thing you see coming up above the curve of the earth is a lighthouse. But it was in one of those prairie towns that I was looking to get out of the wind, and there was a museum in a town called Vandalia, Illinois, and the woman was showing me various artifacts from the town's history, and she had a large ring, which she said, "Do you know what this is?" No, I said, "This is a slave collar," and it just sort of stepped back a little bit, and she was saying that that Vandalia had been a route on the Underground Railroad. And I was kind of going back to another kind of discovery at a museum, but on the other side of the ocean in Bristol, England. My family is there is a Goodrich Castle not too far from Bristol, England. So we wanted to take our son there. And I was wandering through the Museum of the Commonwealth. Bristol is a seafaring town, and they had an exhibit of a sea captain by the name of John Goodrich. And John Goodrich was a captain on the Middle Passage, and kept distressingly good records about picking up 265 from West Africa and landing 141 in Jamaica. And you just realize that just the staggering number of souls lost here. And it kind of, I think that kind of oriented me towards this ride. I think there are kind of some dangers for, for a white guy looking at the Underground Railroad, in that you can make it out to be something that was much bigger than it was. That, the order of magnitude, there are probably 20,000 or so souls who reached freedom, but you compare that to something on the order of 1 million who were taken from the upper South to the lower South during the time of as cotton is exploding. So you kind of have to be careful and maybe have a little bit of humility when you're talking about this, because you might find a surprise in your own ancestry. Certainly I did.
That leads me into kind of the broader impact of the book, which is that for the average American, and certainly the average white American, when learning about the history of slavery in this country and the history of enslavers and enslaved people, the education that most people receive is pretty incomplete. And when you spoke just now about the staggering magnitude of loss and of the violence of the era, do you feel that, this is a two-part question, do you feel like, one, biking, so physically laboring to get yourself along this route to connect with these places, allowed you to connect more with the history in a meaningful way, in a material way? And two, do you feel that in the course of this journey you discovered a truer history of slavery in the United States?
Regarding the first question, I felt like I could get a little closer to the experience of people who of the freedom seekers, but it's like, okay, I'm out on the road, I'm in the weather, and working, but at the same time I have assured shelter. I'm not traveling at night, and I have the benefit of Gore-Tex and shiny gears and nobody chasing me. So there, it gets you a certain way along that road, but you can discover things that are still there. The one that strikes me, we went through. There's a state park in Delaware called Blackbird, where we know that Harriet Tubman was there, and we found these sweet pods on the floor, and it's like, oh, I read about these, that these were just the anathema for people on the run in bare feet. They're just little spiky seed pods, and the story that was there was once when she was stopped at Blackbird, that, just the phrase is that she had a toothache that she dispensed with a rock. It's like, okay, this is a tough lady. But so anyway, that's sort of the getting closer to it. Can you just rewind a little bit on the second question?
Just that going on this journey and being up close and personal with all of the landmarks and the artifacts, do you feel that you gained a truer sense of the history of that era in the United States? Which is sort of just answered a little bit, but if you could just expand on that.
Yes, I mean, you kind of realize that there are places along the way. Natchez, Mississippi has this just a marker for a place called Forks in the Road, which was the biggest market that there was. And you go back and look, I got an ad reproduced in the book that, people are really advertising the people that they are selling. And the other was in writing today, the stretch from New Orleans to Baton Rouge, colloquially known as Cantarelli now because of all the refineries, chemical plants along the way. But this was also the place of the largest revolt of the enslaved, the Charles Deslandes revolt in 1811. And I just started thinking about it. It's like, okay, this is 3 years before Francis Scott Key is talking about the land of the free and the home of the brave. It's like, okay, that was kind of what Charles Deslandes and company were looking for. The one other thing, just in that, trying to realize the scale of it, part of it is on the cover of the book, the lower illustration. It's a little hard to see on the cover, but it's like a V through the woods. And that's a stretch of the Natchez Trace, which was the began as an Indian trail and was a trail of commerce between Nashville and Natchez, Mississippi. And there's a beautiful parkway there, which is spectacular for riding. But you realize that Natchez Trace is one of those places. It's like the Oregon Trail out west, where you can see the wagon tracks in spots. And on the Natchez Trace, that V through the forest was primarily by chained feet. This was the main route from places like Franklin and Armfield, the slave pens in Alexandria, where people were marched down the Shenandoah Valley to Nashville on the Natchez Trace to Natchez, and wore that cut through the forest. So it's kind of graphically, to me, what a giant enterprise that this was.
Right. I mean, talking about not just the impact on cities and towns, but the impact of these events on the natural world around and through all of these spaces. It's something that I think maybe a lot of us don't think about a lot. There are permanent pathways worn down by chained feet marching south. And that's a powerful thing to think about and a powerful thing to see, of course. Thank you. I want to get to, I know that you have a reading that you want to get into, but I'm curious about, you've spoken about a few places along the road that stood out to you and that were striking. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the most striking places or experiences along this journey?
Well, one of them was kind of ties to DC, where up in Cazenovia, New York, there's an old daguerreotype of the 1850 Anti-Fugitive Slave Law Convention there. And the daguerreotype has Gerrit Smith, who was one of the principal funders of the Harper's Ferry raid, and Frederick Douglass, a very young Frederick Douglass. And there are, along with everybody else on the stage, there are two Black girls in bonnets. And And I just discovered, just riding around here, I rode through Cazenovia, but going back and looking at that daguerreotype, these are the Edmondson sisters, and they were part of this drama in Washington of the Pearl escape, where it was arranged for a sailing vessel called the Pearl that on a Saturday night would set sail with 70 of the enslaved. The wind was the wrong direction. They got caught at the mouth of the Potomac, towed back to Washington. The people on the Pearl were paraded through town and then quickly sold south, including the Edmondson sisters. And the Edmondson sisters went. Their father was a freeman, and went to a congressman, an abolitionist congressman from Ohio, and the case of the Edmondson sisters became this cause célèbre in the abolitionist community, and they raised enough money to buy their freedom. And they were like the honored guest at the Anti-Fugitive Slave Convention. Now, Mary Edmondson, who was the older of the two, these are like 15 and 17-year-old girls. Mary Edmondson died from tuberculosis in about a year after that. Emily is recruited again. The abolitionists still had something for her. They were starting a school in Washington for African American women. It was originally the minor school for colored girls that became part of the DC Teachers College, that became part of the University of the District of Columbia. The minor building is still around, and we rode to see it. But if you go to Alexandria, there is this spectacular statue of the Edmondson sisters at the site where they were held, at the pen where they were held, right on Duke Street in Alexandria. So it's like there were some connections that were very fun to make.
And now I know that you have a selection you'd like to read, so we can proceed with that.
Sure. A little story. My friend Jan and I were riding into Oberlin, Ohio, and we were seriously beat up. Jan had a fall hard enough to crack his helmet, and I had a fever for about the last 5 days that I could not seem to shake. It's like, we really need a rest day. So we came into Oberlin and had a rest day, and we're just wandering around town. And there is a monument in Oberlin to a cenotaph to 3 men who were lost in the Harper's Ferry raid. And one of them is his name was Lewis Leary, who was recruited by John Brown. At the Harper's Ferry raid, he was killed on the banks of the Shenandoah River, and he had with him, as a number of the raiders did, a blanket shawl, and the shawl made it back to his wife in Oberlin. She remarries as a grandmother. She is raising her grandson, and she will wrap the baby in the shawl. So let me find it here. Mary Patterson Leary remarried, and some years later came to raise a young grandson born into the new century. She would wrap the baby in the shawl, believing in passing on the spirit of the young husband she had known to be brave to desperation. The shawl rests today at the Ohio Historical Society in Columbus. When I arranged to see the shawl, I imagined entering a great glass and steel museum. Instead, I pulled up to a windowless prefab building in an industrial park, the sort of place one would expect to find the remains of Roswell UFOs. I gently rang the doorbell. The steel door swung open, and Rebecca Odom, the curator, escorted me to a broad, flat table with a large cardboard tube. She put on latex gloves and gently unrolled one of the most treasured objects in our collection. The blanket shawl is a large, tattered piece of brown wool with blue stripes. It has holes from moths and holes from wear along the folds. But if objects can have power, the shawl does. The baby that Mary Pattison wrapped in the shawl grew to be a young vagabond, traveling from city to city, even crewing on a tramp steamer to Africa. He worked as a busboy in a Washington hotel before his poems gained recognition. Langston Hughes would become the great poet of the Harlem Renaissance. And just today, coming out of the Metro and sort of proving it's like Langston Hughes was the Warden Park, right behind the Metro stop. And he wrote a poem about Harper's Ferry that says, "Since Harper's Ferry is alive with ghosts today, immortal raiders come again to town. Perhaps you will recall John Brown."
Beautiful. What an incredible moment. A piece of history as fragile as that, lasting so long. So speaking of the nondescript building that looks like it might house UFOs, can we talk a little bit about some of because I imagine that in the writing of this book, you had to speak with historians and do some research into the sundry details about the experiences that you were having on the journey. Can you talk a little bit about some of that research and some of the either historians or experts that you may have spoken with in the course of writing this book?
Sure. Some of it, some folks here don't know a little bit about route finding for the bike, and I was trying to find Harriet Tubman's route to Ontario, and it's very well marked on the Eastern Shore. There's an app you can have that basically goes, of the many stops and stories that she has along the way, and then you kind of lose the trail once you're about at Wilmington. And I was trying to say, what is a reasonable approximation for a route, even though she took many of them. And I went to the Library of Congress, and some of you have been to the reading room, and it just sort of feels like, just the must of the books is just kind of intoxicating there. And I finally, toward the end of the day, found this book called The Hippocene Guide to the Underground Railroad by one Charles Blockson. Charles Blockson, and in the appendix, he had, here's a driving tour for Harriet Tubman's route. It's like, okay, this will work. I could ride that too. But it turns out that Charles Blockson is one of the eminent African-American historians. And there is a Blockson Center at Temple University where he hangs out at from time to time. And I basically have an appointment to meet him in person. He had and has a collection of African-American historical artifacts. And one of those was Harriet Tubman's Bible that he donated to the Museum of African-American History and Culture here in DC. It was kind of quite a ceremony. You kind of get to realizing there are some folks that where there's maybe a little focus on the storytelling, and then there are folks that are focused on the history. Kate Clifford Larson's biography of Harriet Tubman was spectacularly researched, and I use that as a guide for quite a bit. And then in one of the people that was has an Underground Railroad house in Albany, New York. A couple, Paul and Mary Liz Stewart, they, I guess you could call it research, but my friend Lynn and I were pretty lost. It was raining hard and we didn't know where we were. I thought we were at this Underground Railroad house. I made some internet contact and we stop and a car door opens and the guy comes out and with a bag of sandwiches and said, "You've given us a little more notice, we would have had a brass band for you," and takes us inside the house. And this was a side story, but not really. They had pictures on the wall of the of wooden boxes, 14 of them. And I asked him about it. I said, "Well, there's a story there that in Albany in 2005, when they're digging for a sewer project, and they come upon the remains of enslaved people, 14. And it's like, what do we do here? What is the right thing to do here?" And there was a lot of discussion within the Black community in Albany, like, would these people prefer just to be buried, or would you like, would you like, could their bones tell something about their story? So they decided to work with the New York Museum. They had a reconstruction of one of the women there, of her face. And it's like, this is someone who could live. This is someone who could be down the street. And they learned where these people came from West Africa, Madagascar. There was one person there who was from a Canadian First Nations tribe, and they consulted with them about the proper burial rites. But they put out a call for when they were doing the reburial that they wanted to make these ossuaries, these wooden boxes. And they had people from all over New England, artists, woodworkers, school kids, doing designs for the boxes. And they were, for the ceremony, they had the boxes laid out in the Schuyler mansion. He was the man who enslaved them. And the people that were at that reburial in 2016 describe it as one of the most moving things that they came across. The picture that I end the book with is the very small woman, Evelyn King, who was the chair of the reburial committee, and a giant white guy, woodworker, artist, sculptor. You can see he's in his coat and tie, but you can see the tattoo on his hand. It's like, it's probably not his normal outfit. And there was just something that with the two of them next to the boxes that speaks to me of grace and hope and reconciliation. It was a very neat thing that just still, about how that came to be. So I guess that's sort of research.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I think you mentioned you have a second selection you might want to share.
Yeah.
With us.
Actually, I've basically spoken about Albany and about the Edmondson sisters, but just for folks, if you do get a chance to look at the book, there is the daguerreotype with the Edmondson sisters in it. It's page 75. That kind of took me on the path following them, but yeah, I don't have another one particularly picked out.
Excellent. But speaking of the daguerreotype in the book, there are many either illustrations or recreations of photographs, daguerreotypes, and other pieces of media that you encountered in the process of putting this book together. Can you talk a little bit about how why it's important to have these actual, well, these photocopies of these photographs and small pieces of history as part of the storytelling in the book?
The just sort of by comparison, we have images and pictures that follow us around everywhere, and the idea that to have a semi-photographic image where everybody has to stand still for 10 or 20 seconds, they become very rare, clearly very staged things. And there was just something that draws me to those photographs. I mean, that the one of the chapters, Barbara is a Quaker, and one of the chapters is called "In the Company of Friends." And what drew me to this particular part of Pennsylvania was a photograph at the Longwood Meeting House, where they have William Lloyd Garrison is there. This is the prominent abolitionist from Boston, and it took me a while to figure it out in talking with the docent, but also in that picture was Thomas Garrett, who was like the boss of the Underground Railroad in Wilmington. There is a statue in Wilmington that's called Tubman Garrett Park. There's a statue of the two of them, and it's like, oh, and there he is. This was a guy who was bankrupted in a court judgment by none other than Roger Taney, who was the judge for the Dred Scott decision, who basically threw the book at Thomas Garrett, bankrupted him, and then Garrett stands up and says, "If there is anyone in need of shelter and escape, have them come to me." And that sort of was his mic drop moment, if you will.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about the impact of On Freedom Road, because we're talking about, we've discussed a few of the highlights and some of the finer points of your experience on this 3,000-mile journey through some of the hardest pieces of American history. And so I'm curious about when you're writing this, it has the flavor of memoir, but it also has elements of sort of almost like a minor element of history to it, of course, like historical writing, and it also has something of essays about reflecting on these parts of our history. So my question is, after all that preamble, is what do you see the impact of these words being as more and more people read it and connect to that experience and connect to that history? And what do you hope to see?
Well, I hope it's kind of like a little, maybe a little drop in the ocean in what's getting to be a fairly, to my mind, frightening tendency in American discussion right now, that this idea, and here I'm talking about things like the decline of the Florida turning down the African American History AP course. There are a couple of laws on the books that make it illegal for teachers to teach anything that will make students, presumably white students, uncomfortable. And almost from a historical point of view, it's like this kind of thing, it might seem new, but it's not. I just, if I can take it up. I ran across a quote while I was doing this in W.B. Du Bois' Black Reconstruction in America from 1935. It says, "One is astonished in the study of history at the recurrence of the idea that evil must be forgotten, distorted, skimmed over. It's like, here we are again. And, you know, what I'd like to do is just to sort of say there are, I'd like to highlight some stories of American heroes, some of which are very well known, like Harriet Tubman, and some of which have almost been lost to history. But just the idea that this was a very small number of people working against an enormous institution. That, you know, when Frederick Douglass lands in New York as, you know, as a free man, he's very lucky that he talks to the right people, because there are gangs hunting and rendering freedom seekers all over the city. I mean, New York was almost owned by the cotton trade. So, but the idea that this is something that was not just a little thing that happened back in the 1840s, but it was fundamental to how the U.S. was formed. And we don't like to think of it that way, but we kind of look at the almost hysterical reaction to the 1619 project, and it's like, no, we don't want to talk about this. It's like, no, you really need to.
And to veer into a bit of a tangent here, really quick, I'm curious about what your thoughts are, because you mentioned a little bit about how in this age of ubiquitous access to information, essentially through the internet, at least, you know, how many communities and many states, some of which would have been the very same states fighting on the side of slavery back then, are trying their darndest to kill this information, to kill the history, and to distort it, as mentioned in the quote. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about what the average person can do aside from writing an entire book, to help preserve these histories and to participate in the reckoning that the United States must have with its history in order to survive and to continue to grow and thrive as a nation.
I think a couple of things. A lot of it has to do with the teaching of history, and this is being fought at the school board levels all over the country. And so part of it, you know, part of what people can do is to make sure that that this history is not suppressed. There was a cartoon in the Post about 2 weeks ago where it has a couple of Black girls opening a crate labeled Florida oranges, and inside are books labeled Black history, and it's the title of the cartoon is The New Underground Railroad. So one way or another, we need to make sure that that this gets out, and that the fact that some part of your history is making you uncomfortable, that's a good thing. That's the way it's supposed to be. I mean, I don't advocate renaming our fair city, but you know, George Washington was a remarkable, persistent general. You know, decided to turn over the reins to civilians after his army had won the war. But at the same time, in New York City, when the British are leaving, he is essentially throwing a hissy fit because the British are taking with them the freedom seekers who came over the line and came into New York City. And the British said, "You come help us, fight with us, we will give you your freedom." And they sailed away with them. And Washington was furious about that. So, but anyway, the idea is it's okay to study history, warts and all, and I'm certainly not talking about the institution of slavery like it was some kind of a little war. work. It was foundational to a lot of the things that we have today.
To continue a little bit down this tangent here, I know that much of your work is in climate and climate activism, mental awareness, and hopefully preventing climate devastation as much as possible. I'm curious about. I'm going to find a way to connect these two. I'm curious about. So we're talking about, the importance of reckoning with our history and reckoning with the truth of what has happened in the past. And I'm sure you have noticed that in present day, there's a lot of polarized reactions to facts of the day. And it tends to come out in terms of facts about what our climate is doing right now, and facts about how certain corporations and certain major large actors in the United States are driving misinformation and changing the way that information is available to the public. To think of an example, the derailed train in East Palestine, Ohio. You may notice there's hardly any media coverage for that, and that is in its own way a disinformation campaign. If it's obscured and obfuscated, then the general public can't know enough about it to act. All that to bring it back around, all that to say, what are your thoughts on the way, I suppose I would say that one of the major ways that information and fact and sort of the truth of our situation is being controlled in present day is around climate. And I wonder if you see connections between that and the way that history, some of the darker parts of the United States history, when it comes to slavery and when it comes to all of these things, do you see a connection there?
There's certainly a parallelism. I work for an outfit called the U.S. Global Change Research Program. It's sort of an interagency office here in Washington. And one of the things we had to do was to put out, here's the status of climate research. And we were discovering that fairly what we thought were non-controversial statements about climate. This was back during Bush 2. We're getting edited, and that actually one of the people working on the project actually sent the edits to the New York Times, and it became a pretty big thing because the guy who was doing the edits came from American Petroleum Institute, worked in the White House, and then went to work for ExxonMobil. So there was a certain benefit there in the fog machine, and there's a similar kind of fog machine, almost related to the environmental justice movement. The stretch between Baton Rouge and New Orleans is colloquially known as Cancer Alley. It is a predominantly Black neighborhood, and in many ways, the reason that there are all these chemical plants there is, certainly that the transportation cost is there, but also you have people without necessarily the political power to resist. And there's, you even see it from the Louisiana politicians just sort of saying, well, all these cancer rates are really have to do with lifestyle choices, and they're smoking too much in the way of cigarettes. When we rode through there and we had dinner, and the woman said, okay, what kind of bottled water you want? I said, well, we'll take tap water. She said, no, you will take bottled water. It's like the locals know what's going on. So, and that was the same place where where the biggest slave revolt in U.S. history took place. This is the same ground some of these people are the ancestors of the people who were in the slave revolt.
I'm glad you mentioned that because it's often said by climate activists that the communities that will be most affected and already are being most affected by climate devastation are Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, especially those who are under the poverty line and don't have access to, as you said, the political power to change the things that the powers that be are doing with their communities. And so when we're talking about, not just the Underground Railroad, but the conditions of certain regions and the way that communities were condensed at the time because of slavery in the South and in the North, wherever it existed. And then you see those same lands are the lands that experience chemical runoff or other kinds of community pollution. And then you see a different map overlaid on that one, and you see those are the districts that experience the most voter suppression, the harshest the harshest laws in that regard. So I just think, and I'm glad you were able to speak on it. I think it's really interesting to study these historical moments and these cultural artifacts, and also understand them in the context of present day and how the reverberations of those lives and those political decisions of 100, 200, 300 years ago are still affecting us to this day. That's the end of my spiel and I will speech. So with a few minutes left, I'd like to hear from you about something sort of at the end of this book, when you realize this book is done, I'm finished, it's ready to meet the world. What was the condition of your heart at that time? What were you feeling and thinking as you held the finished product in your hands and you thought, this is what I'm thinking and feeling?
You get so close to it that each time you read it, you think, oh boy, I should have done better. And there actually has to come a certain point that you just say, stop. It's like, it is what it is. No, it was, this was a long project. The rides were over 3 different years. And I think one of the things that I felt good about was sort of learning about writing while I was doing this. I tell people my writing education is like my sex education, namely non-existent, and you'll pick it up on the street. So I wrote lots of technical stuff, but I didn't know how to write for story. And these things that you read about, the importance of a story arc, of how your characters develop, about avoiding passive voice, and all of these little tricks that I gradually learned along the way with the help of my writing group. That felt good. I felt like I can probably find a story that I ran into on the road and ask myself, what's the heart of that story? Why would I tell this story? And then figure out where in a chapter that would land, where it would start, and what kind of gymnastics you do in the air to get there, what that story arc looks like. So that part was fun. That part was fun.
Well, I'm glad you did all of that, because now we have this wonderful book to read and to explore alongside you as if we were there. So thank you so much for joining me this evening. I'd like to open it up for questions from our audience as well. Yes.
I'd like to take another run at the theme that the two of you were exploring about the parallels between this subject matter of the slavery and the Underground Railroad and the current day climate crisis. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about parallels with regard to collusion and action. And if there are lessons that you would draw from the Underground Railroad material that would be applicable to today with regard to power collusion in the crisis of our day.
I guess one of the things that you would see in the old literature about slavery was about how you know, these were basically happy people and benevolent overseers. Benevolent enslavers is what we would call them. And there's, that was their equivalent of public relations at the time. It's like, we need to sort of cover this up as best we can. And I know that I think for the oil companies now, it is, delaying action is to their benefit. I think, I've heard it said, it's just like, I want to just get to my retirement. I want to just cash in on my side of this sort of before it all comes down. I think a lot of people recognize that that in the long run, oil and gas is on the decline. And it's like, no, that's too slow. You can't, you can't take it easy on this. But so that's kind of a public relations push. And the fact that you still have people that say, well, climate change isn't happening. This is all some kind of a conspiracy. I mean, I know from the whole idea of storytelling, we as humans tend to create stories, whether there's something there or not. You take 5 unrelated facts and you can put those together in a story and call it a conspiracy theory too. So there is this in both issues from the institutions that were keeping slavery going and the institutions that are keeping us burning stuff. There are certainly some similarities there.
Also, many of them are the same institutions.
Yeah.
Or at least, the money from the first institution pays for the one that exists now.
Dave, I have a very light question. Let's see. So, as someone who does holocycling as well, I was wondering, as you're chronicling, I guess,
yeah,
all your stories, right? And you're pushing people in your spandex, right? Doesn't that make you more vulnerable, I guess, and more, the people open up to you and kind of tell you the real story of what they feel about things and the situation they're in, rather than if you come in with your, reporter card or your, what I mean? So do you think that the biking approach, that talking to people while you're in your, spandex attire, can you a deeper story that you would have gotten otherwise?
Yeah. Felipe knows that the kind of the motto of the first book was old guys in spandex is not pretty. But I do find when I'm writing solo, it is much easier to approach people. I mean, I had the case in Indiana, just where I'm stopped off, weather's kind of nasty. I'm at a lunch counter, and I go to pay the bill and says, "Oh, he picked it up." It's like, what? And you're not threatening. If you commit a crime, you have the slowest getaway car imaginable. So people realize you're not going to mess with you, or you're not going to mess with them. And I've had a number of cases where just the random acts of kindness thing was out in eastern Washington, middle of nowhere, Garfield, a grain town, and I was calling because I said, "Oh, you can camp in the town park," and then okay, call up the town cop and just let him know that's what you're doing. And so I'm at the restaurant and I call up the town cop and he says, yeah, sure, we'll keep an eye on you. And I hang up and the waitress says, oh, why don't you just come stay with us tonight? It's like, okay. and we're still friends to this day. That was like 30 years ago. So yes, there you are. You're exposed and out there, and I think there's an overemphasis on the danger that's involved. I mean, it's a lot of work sometimes, but I've certainly had cars pass me closer than I want. But it kind of gets summarized by the truck driver at a truck stop. I was sitting next to him. He says, "No, we never hit you. Too much paperwork." It's like, okay, I feel so much better.
Yeah.
Questions?
Well, I'd hate if I just had missed this at the beginning of your talk. I came in a little late, but curious about two things. One, what type of bike were you riding during this? I know it was over the course of a few years, so maybe they're different bikes. And then second, just in terms of the those difficult physical moments, do you have any moments that stood out to you in terms of where it was a very tough day to whether it's getting over a lot of elevation rise or anything like that? How does it stand out to you?
The bike that I rode actually through all of these rides up until the last year was a Trek 520, which is it's kind of the horse of the Trans Am. It's an old heavy steel bike, but it can carry a lot of weight. And
I got one myself. So.
Oh, okay, very good. You know this the love affair with it. And as far as the physical side of things, there are some places that it's like no matter what kind of good shape you're in, they're just plain nasty. I mean, Kentucky, there were some fine people I met in Kentucky. There were definitely had some of those cases of people taking me in, but Kentucky is super lumpy. I mean, just up and down and up and down, and with a lot of rumble strips and no shoulders and a lot of dogs. I had a little can of pepper spray, and I remember I cut my ride in Kentucky short because I was running out of pepper spray. We had some. It had one was on an earlier ride, but in Missouri, I came to this T crossroads, end of a long day, weather's going to pieces, and there are a bunch of stray dogs that are off to the side, and I'm thinking, okay, well, somebody's going to come and get them. No, they're just sitting there, and they see me, and I see them, and so I get all cranked up, got my pepper spray. I go roaring through the intersection, and they're on me. There are 8 of them, and I kind of do this perfect shot under my armpit and take out about 4 of them. And then there's one overachiever who's on my right side, and aerosol cans don't work upside down, and he's kind of making up ground on me, and kind of going for either the thigh or the drumstick, and then it's just like adrenaline kicks in. I mean, I'm on an uphill and I'm just roaring, and I managed to outleg him. And it was a quote from Winston Churchill that there is nothing so exhilarating as having been shot at without effect. But yeah, I mean, you just it's stories, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of weather sometimes, but you remember, I mean, first tour when I went across, I like remember almost every hour of that. I have no idea what I did yesterday or where I left stuff, or but I can remember exactly what was going on, coming through Bloomington, Indiana. And it's it's a very vivid way of getting around. Very time consuming. And it's the kind of thing that you lean more into as you get older. I mean, there's sort of young people, and then there's old people, and the young people have terrible equipment, but they're in great shape, and the older people, it's kind of the reverse. You know, you can spend on some good equipment, but you don't have your clothes bungeed in a plastic bag on the back of your bike. So anyway, a few reflections on touring, which sounds like you've done a good bit of it yourself.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Do you have any more questions?
What's next?
Next is that Permian Basin ride. I mean, I've been across it. I know what that oil field is like. I know some of the oil men, and that Texas is at once the problem and the solution, because there is the most advanced wind industry as well in the country. And you talk about a lot of wind and a lot of sun, they've got it all in West Texas. And at the same time, kind of like the second half of the Permian story would be almost like the cost. The ride that I haven't done yet is Austin to New Orleans, like through Houston, Port Arthur, which is, from everything I gather, pretty rough down. Would be classified as your sacrifice zones. The Grand Isle, Louisiana, which sort of used to be New Orleans Beach, that's gotten blown apart in more than one hurricane, and then of course the Cancer Valley region between Baton Rouge and New Orleans again.
Thank you so much. And for our audience here and our viewers at home, how can you keep up with your work?
There is a page on Pegasus Books has been my publisher, and for some reason they've stuck with me for quite a long time, and they can check out my work on this book, and the two prior ones are both on the Pegasus site. So what do you do?
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again for joining me. This has been an incredible conversation. And thank you all for being here as well.
Thank you very much.
Well, everyone, if you'd like to sign books, and if you'd like to get your book signed, now it's time.
Thank you, Dave.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yes, I would like to get a autograph copy. With at least 3 paragraphs, with the story arc and everything else. Just practice your writing skills.
Your kids fight with you?
No. Well, I take that back. The best ride I was ever on, El Camino de Santiago in Spain, the pilgrimage route across northern Spain. My daughter was just finished graduate